Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18+ Ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper and more intense versions are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. There is a specific kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, but sinks into your bones and decides to live there. That was the first thing I felt when I opened my eyes in this world. The suffocating, freezing dark of a lotus pond in the dead of winter. The original owner of this body, a forgotten political hostage named Prince Lin Yao, had thrown himself into this freezing water because the emperor had walked past him in the gardens without looking at him. It sounds absurd, doesn't it, to end your life over a man's diverted gaze? But the original Lin Yao had loved Emperor Shen Zhao with a desperate, pathetic, crawling kind of devotion. He had spent 3 years in the great Yan Empire's palace, humiliating himself, begging for scraps of attention, weaving terrible poetry, and standing in the rain just hoping the emperor's palanquin would pass by. He died in this freezing water, his heart broken, his lungs full of ice. And then, I woke up in his place. A man from a modern world. A man who worked 60 hours a week, paid taxes, and had absolutely no time for theatrical royal romances. I broke the surface of the water, gasping, coughing up the bitter taste of pond scum and algae. The winter air hit my wet face like a handful of knives. I dragged myself onto the stone edge of the pond, my heavy silk robes weighing 40 pounds, pulling me down like wet cement. I lay there on the frozen marble, staring up at a gray, unforgiving sky, trying to understand why my memories suddenly contained a lifetime of palace etiquette and a catastrophic, embarrassing obsession with a man I had never actually met. Footsteps, heavy, precise, surrounded by the rustle of imperial armor. I turned my head. Standing above me, surrounded by a dozen silent guards and shivering eunuchs, was Emperor Shen Zhao. He was devastatingly handsome. I will give the original Lin Yao that much credit. His taste was aesthetically flawless. The emperor had sharp, aristocratic features carved from cold jade, eyes as dark as an abyss, and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. He wore robes of black and gold, entirely unbothered by the cold. He looked down at me, shivering and dripping on the marble, with an expression of absolute disgust. "Is this your new tactic, Prince Lin?" Shen Zhao's voice was smooth, deep, and laced with absolute venom. "Throwing yourself into the imperial pond to force me to look at you? It is pathetic. You soil the water." The eunuchs held their breath. They expected me to weep. The original Lin Yao would have crawled to his boots, coughing up pond water, begging for his warmth, sobbing that he only wanted a single glance. My body's muscle memory actually twitched, urging me to kneel. I took a slow, rattling breath, feeling the freezing air in my new lungs. I didn't kneel, I didn't cry. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, wiped the freezing water from my eyes, and looked up at the most powerful man in the world with absolute, unadulterated exhaustion. "You're standing on my sleeve," I said. The entire courtyard froze. The silence was so absolute you could hear the water dripping from my hair onto the stone. Shen Zhao's dark eyes narrowed. He looked down. The tip of his black leather boot was, indeed, resting on the edge of my soaked, pitiful silk sleeve. "Move," I said, my voice hoarse but completely flat. "I am freezing to death, and unless your decree is an execution by pneumonia, I would like to go back to my room and sit by a fire." I didn't wait for him to process it. I didn't wait for his permission. I just yanked my sleeve out from under his boot, ignored the collective gasp of the guards who probably thought I was about to be beheaded, and pulled myself to my feet. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to lock. I didn't look at his face again. I didn't care about his face. I was tired, I was cold, and I was entirely done with this dramatic nonsense. I walked right past the Emperor of Great Yan, leaving a trail of pond water on his immaculate marble pavilion, and headed toward the dilapidated cluster of buildings they called the Cold Palace. I didn't look back. If I had, I would have seen an expression on Emperor Shen Zhao's face that no one had ever seen before. The absolute, jarring shock of a man who suddenly realizes the game he was playing has changed its rules. The Cold Palace wasn't actually a palace. It was a glorified storage closet in the furthest, most neglected corner of the imperial grounds. The roof leaked, the windows rattled in the wind, and the courtyard was overgrown with dead weeds. For the original Lin Yao, this place was a prison, a daily reminder of his failure to win the emperor's heart. He used to sit by the window and cry until his eyes swelled shut. For me, it was a quiet, rent-free apartment with no neighbors, no emails, and no screaming bosses. It was paradise. I spent the first month completely ignoring the outside world. I used the pathetic stipend the palace provided to bribe a kitchen servant into bringing me good tea leaves and heavy blankets, instead of the useless decorative silks the original used to buy. I fixed the rattling windows with pieces of carved wood. I cleared the dead weeds in the courtyard and planted winter vegetables. I found a cracked clay stove, patched it with mud, and spent my evenings brewing roasted tea, reading historical texts I found in an abandoned study, and enjoying the absolute pristine silence. The desperate, cloying love that the original had felt for the Emperor dissolved from my chest like morning mist. It wasn't my love. It wasn't my heartbreak. I just wanted to survive, drink my tea, and eventually find a way out of this gilded cage. But I forgot one fundamental rule about powerful, arrogant men. If you chase them, they despise you. But if you walk away from them, if you truly, genuinely do not care about them anymore, they lose their minds. It happened on a Tuesday. The snow had just started to melt, leaving the courtyard damp and smelling of wet pine. I was sitting on the wooden steps of my ruined pavilion, wearing a plain, unadorned cotton robe, carving a wooden spoon with a small knife. My hair was tied back with a simple strip of cloth. I looked nothing like a royal prince, and everything like a commoner. The heavy wooden doors of my courtyard were suddenly pushed open. I didn't look up immediately. I thought it was the kitchen boy bringing my rice. "Put the basket by the door, Ping," I said, blowing the wood shavings off my new spoon, "and tell the cook the ginger last week was stale. I will be sure to have the imperial kitchen staff executed for their incompetence." The voice was deep, resonant, and dripping with dangerous authority. The knife slipped, lightly nicking my thumb. I sighed, sucked a drop of blood from my finger, and finally looked up. Emperor Shen Zhao was standing in my ruined courtyard. He was dressed in casual, yet impossibly expensive robes of deep charcoal and silver. He looked entirely out of place among my cabbages and patched windows. 2 imperial guards stood outside the gate, eyes averted. He stared at me. He looked at my plain clothes, my tied-back hair, the dirt on my hands, and the little wooden spoon. He looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had missing pieces. "Your Majesty," I said. I didn't stand up. I just sat there on the steps, resting my arms on my knees. To what do I owe the honor? Did I drown in the wrong pond? His jaw tightened. The original Lin Yao would have been on his knees by now, weeping, touching the hem of the emperor's robes. Shen Zhao took a slow step forward. His dark eyes scanned my face, searching for the desperation he was used to. He found nothing, just calm, mild annoyance. "It has been a month," Shen Zhao said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that smooth, dangerous tone that made his enemies tremble. "You have not sent a single letter. You have not waited outside my study. You have not played your lute in the middle of the night to annoy me. You haven't even requested winter coal." "I fixed the drafts in the windows," I said plainly, pointing to the wooden frames, "and I prefer quiet. Turns out, not freezing to death is a great motivator for home repair." He stepped closer. He was tall. Unfairly tall. He loomed over me, casting a long shadow that blocked the winter sun. The scent of him washed over me. Sandalwood, cold metal, and something deep and musky that felt intensely masculine. It was the scent the original owner used to dream about. I just found it a bit heavy. "Look at me," Shen Zhao commanded softly. I tilted my head up and met his gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't blush. I looked at him the way you look at a mildly interesting painting on a wall. He stared into my eyes for a long, heavy moment. The silence between us stretched, pulling taut like a bowstring. I could see the exact moment the realization hit him. The manic, pathetic light that used to live in Lin Yao's eyes was gone. The soul looking back at him was cold, steady, and completely out of his reach. A strange dark flicker crossed the Emperor's face. Something dangerous. "You are playing a new game," he whispered, leaning down slightly, his voice a dark rumble. "A game of indifference. You think acting cold will draw my attention." I actually laughed. It was a short, breathy sound of pure amusement. "Your Majesty," I smiled, picking up my knife and returning to my carving. "You are giving yourself entirely too much credit. I'm not playing a game. I just finally realized that my life is much more peaceful when you are not in it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish this spoon before my soup gets cold." I dismissed the Emperor. I literally dismissed the most feared man on the continent to carve a piece of wood. Shen Zhao didn't scream. He didn't order my death. He just stood there for a very long time, watching my hands move. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of my courtyard. I thought I had won. I thought I had made my point. I was an idiot. 2 days later, an imperial edict arrived. I was no longer banished to the cold palace. Instead, Emperor Shen Zhao had appointed me as his personal ink grinder and scroll reader in the imperial study. I was dragged out of my peaceful, quiet life, dressed in heavy, restrictive court robes of deep blue silk, and thrown directly into the lion's den. The imperial study was a massive room filled with towering bookshelves, heavy golden braziers, and the overwhelming scent of ink and sandalwood. It was meant to be a place of quiet focus. Instead, it became a battlefield of silent, suffocating tension. For the first few days, Shen Zhao didn't speak to me. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reading reports from the front lines, while I knelt beside him, silently grinding the black ink stick against the stone. But I could feel him watching me. Every time I looked down, I could feel the weight of his gaze on the side of my neck, on the line of my jaw, on my hands as they moved in slow, rhythmic circles. It was a heavy, physical pressure. It made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. One evening, the study was quiet. Outside, a heavy rain had begun to fall, drumming against the paper windows. The room was lit only by the warm, flickering glow of the candles. It was intimate, too intimate. I was grinding the ink, my mind drifting to what I wanted to cook for dinner, when my hand slowed for a fraction of a second. Suddenly, a large, warm hand closed over my wrist. I gasped softly, my head snapping up. Shen Zhao was leaning across the armrest of his chair, his hand wrapped tightly around my wrist. His grip was firm, his long fingers pressing into my pulse point. His skin was incredibly warm against my cool flesh. "You are grinding too slowly," he murmured, his voice low, almost a vibration in the quiet room. His face was only inches from mine. I could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. The air between us suddenly felt incredibly thin, hard to breathe. "Then let go of me, Your Majesty," I said, keeping my voice steady, though I could feel my pulse picking up under his fingers. "And I will grind faster." He didn't let go. His thumb moved, just slightly, brushing against the delicate skin of my inner wrist. It was a tiny motion, but it sent a shock of electricity straight up my arm. "Your pulse is racing," he observed, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second, before meeting my eyes again. "I thought you said you didn't care anymore, Lin Yao." "I don't," I replied, pulling my arm back. He let me go, but only after a second of resistance. "My pulse is racing because you startled me. You have the quiet footsteps of an assassin." A dark, slow smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It was a terrifyingly handsome expression. "You have changed," Shen Zhao said softly, leaning back in his chair, his eyes trailing down the line of my throat where my collar opened slightly. "The man who threw himself into the pond was weak. He cried at shadows. But you look at me as if you want to slide a dagger between my ribs." "If I had a dagger, Your Majesty, I would use it to cut fruit," I said evenly, returning to the inkstone. "Murdering you sounds like entirely too much paperwork." He let out a low, breathy chuckle. The sound was rough, genuine, and it sent a strange flutter through my stomach that I immediately suppressed. I realized then that this was not a punishment. Shen Zhao hadn't brought me here to torture me. He had brought me here because he was fascinated. He had spent years kicking a dog that only whined and rolled over. Now, the dog was biting back, and the Emperor found he liked the teeth. And if you are enjoying this heavy, candlelit tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation of this story is waiting for you on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment, where the slow burn finally catches fire. The tension between us only grew worse. It became a living, breathing thing in the room. He started finding excuses to break my personal space. If I was reading a scroll, he would lean over my shoulder, his chest brushing against my back, his breath hot against my ear as he pointed to a line of text. If I reached for a brush, his hand would intentionally graze mine. I tried to remain completely indifferent, building a wall of cold logic around myself. But the body I inhabited was treacherous. The original Lin Yao's physical reactions were hardwired into this flesh. Whenever Shen Zhao got too close, my breath would hitch. Whenever he whispered my name, Lin Yao, in that dark, gravelly tone, my stomach would clench. I hated it. I hated that he knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing my boundaries, pushing me into corners, watching my eyes dilate with a mix of frustration and forced restraint. The tipping point happened during the winter solstice banquet. It was a massive affair. The great hall was dripping with gold, filled with hundreds of nobles, generals, and concubines. I was forced to sit at a small table near the front, dressed in stunning white silk robes that Shen Zhao had personally sent to my room. I hated the banquet. I hated the whispering nobles who looked at me like a disgraced pet. I sat there quietly, drinking my wine, keeping my eyes fixed on the dancers. But I could feel him. From the high throne at the head of the room, Shen Zhao's eyes rarely left me. He sat surrounded by beautiful women and powerful ministers, but his gaze kept sliding back to my table, heavy, dark, and possessive. Halfway through the evening, a minister from a rival clan stood up. He was drunk, his face flushed, and he decided to make a spectacle. He raised his cup and looked directly at me. To Prince Lin Yao, the minister slurred loudly, drawing the attention of the whole room. A prince of a conquered state, who plays the lute, writes poetry, and jumps into ponds to entertain our emperor. Tell us, little prince, will you dance for us tonight? Or will you just weep? The hall went dead silent. The music stopped. Every eye turned to me. In the past, the original Lin Yao would have lowered his head, tears spilling down his cheeks, accepting the humiliation because he had no power. I slowly set my wine cup down on the table. The soft clink echoed in the quiet room. I didn't look at the minister. I poured myself another cup of wine, my movements slow and deliberate. Minister Zhao, I said, my voice calm, carrying effortlessly across the room. I am a prince of the Northern Kingdom. I was sent here as a political envoy. I do not dance, but if you are in need of entertainment, I hear your youngest son is very skilled at tumbling, especially into the beds of the Imperial Guards. A collective gasp ripped through the hall. The minister's face turned a violent shade of purple. I had just casually dropped the worst-kept, most scandalous secret in the capital in front of hundreds of people. You insolent, the minister stammered, grabbing the hilt of his ceremonial sword. Enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Emperor Shen Zhao stood up. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. The drunken minister instantly fell to his knees, trembling, sobering up in a second under the sheer crushing weight of the emperor's aura. Shen Zhao didn't even look at the man. He stepped down from his dais, walking slowly across the room until he reached my table. I remained seated, looking up at him. He stopped right in front of me. The entire court was holding its breath. They expected him to strike me for stepping out of line. Instead, Shen Zhao reached down. His large hand grabbed my upper arm, not gently, but not hurting me either. He pulled me to my feet. I stumbled slightly against his chest, and his other hand instantly caught my waist, steadying me. His fingers dug firmly into the silk at my hip, pulling me flush against his hard body. The prince is tired, Shen Zhao announced to the silent room, his voice a low, terrifying purr. I will escort him back to my quarters. If anyone speaks of him with disrespect again, I will personally remove their tongue. Enjoy the banquet. He didn't give me a chance to protest. He kept his hand firmly on my waist, his grip possessive, and practically dragged me out of the great hall. We walked through the cold, moonlit corridors of the palace in silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the overwhelming proximity. His hand was burning like a brand against my waist. When we finally reached the heavy doors of his private bedchamber, he shoved them open, pulled me inside, and kicked the doors shut behind us. The room was vast, lit by the soft glow of dragon-carved lanterns. The moment the doors closed, I shoved his chest, stepping back, trying to put distance between us. What was that? I demanded, my chest heaving. I didn't need you to save me. I had it under control. Shen Zhao took a step toward me. He looked furious, but underneath the anger, there was something wild, something raw that made my breath catch. You had it under control? He stepped closer. I stepped back until my spine hit the cold wood of a pillar. You provoked a military general. He could have drawn his sword. He wouldn't dare, I shot back, lifting my chin. And even if he did, I wouldn't have cowered. I am not the weak boy you remember. Shen Zhao closed the remaining distance between us. He slammed both of his hands against the pillar, caging me in. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with his dark sandalwood scent. I know you are not, he whispered, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged rasp. His dark eyes swept over my face, tracing the line of my nose, my lips, my throat. I know. The boy I remember bored me. The boy I remember was weak. But you. He leaned in, his nose almost brushing mine. I stopped breathing. My hands were flat against the pillar behind me, my fingers curling tightly into the wood. You drive me completely out of my mind, he breathed, his gaze fixed on my lips. Your Majesty? I started, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the calm facade I had built. Stop calling me that, he growled softly. He lifted one hand from the pillar and cupped my jaw. His fingers were slightly rough, sliding into my hair, tracing the shell of my ear. The touch was so gentle it felt like a shock. Call me by my name. I can't, I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. You can. His thumb brushed lightly over my lower lip. I gasped softly, my lips parting instinctively. His eyes darkened completely. You are not afraid of me anymore. You look at me with fire. You fight me. You defy me, and every time you do, I want to pull you into the dark and see how far that fire burns." I stared into his eyes, completely paralyzed. This wasn't the cold, cruel emperor from the original's memories. This was a man utterly consumed, a man standing on the edge of a cliff, begging me to push him over. I should have pushed him away. My modern, logical mind screamed at me to duck under his arm and leave. This was a tyrant. This was dangerous. But as his thumb caressed my cheek, as his heavy, warm breath fanned across my skin, a treacherous, terrifying thought bloomed in my chest. I want this. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I lifted my hand, slowly, hesitantly, and placed it flat against his chest. I could feel his heart thundering beneath the heavy silk of his robes. It was beating just as fast as mine. "Shen Zhao," I whispered his name. He let out a shuddering breath, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second, like the sound of his name on my lips was a physical relief. He leaned down, his lips hovered a millimeter above mine. I could feel the heat of his mouth. The air between us was so thick, so charged, it felt like standing in a thunderstorm right before the lightning strikes. "Lin Yao," he murmured against my lips, his voice raw with need. Before the distance could close, before the lightning could strike, the heavy wooden doors of the bedchamber violently banged open. "Your Majesty, emergency report from the northern border." Shen Zhao tore himself away from me, spinning around, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of the sword he wasn't wearing. His chest was heaving, his eyes blazing with absolute murderous rage at the guard who had just interrupted. I stood frozen against the pillar, my legs trembling, my lips burning from a kiss that hadn't even happened. The guard dropped to his knees, terrified, holding up a scroll sealed with blood-red wax. "The Northern Kingdom," the guard stammered, not daring to look up. "Prince Lin Yao's brother has taken the throne. He is demanding the prince be returned immediately. If Great Yan refuses, it means war." The room plunged into an icy, deafening silence. The heat that had been between us vanished, replaced by the freezing reality of who we were. An emperor and a hostage. Shen Zhao stood rigid, staring at the kneeling guard. Slowly, he turned his head and looked at me. The vulnerability, the raw desire that had been in his eyes just moments ago, was gone, replaced by the cold, terrifying mask of the Emperor of Great Yan. But I saw the slight twitch of his jaw. I saw the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Leave us," Shen Zhao commanded the guard, his voice completely hollow. The guard scurried out, pulling the doors shut. We were alone again, but the space between us felt like a chasm. "So," I said, my voice sounding incredibly loud in the quiet room. I stepped away from the pillar, wrapping my arms around myself, suddenly feeling very cold. "My brother wants me back." Shen Zhao didn't move. He stared at the red-sealed scroll lying on his desk. "You cannot go," he said. "It wasn't a request. It was an imperial decree." "I am a political hostage, Shen Zhao," I said, forcing a bitter smile. "If my country wants me back and you refuse, tens of thousands of people will die on the border. You are an emperor. You do not start wars over a single prisoner." He turned to face me. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a dragon hoarding its gold, willing to burn the entire world to ash to keep a single coin. "You think I care about the border?" He took a slow, heavy step toward me. "You think I care about your brother's empty threats? I have an army of 500,000 men. I will wipe your kingdom off the map before I let them take you from me. Are you insane?" I snapped, the modern logic taking over, anger flaring in my chest. "You would start a war for what? For your pride? Because you finally found a toy that doesn't break when you squeeze it? Because you are mine!" he roared, the sudden volume making the candle flames jump. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, grabbing my shoulders, his fingers digging into my flesh. "You are mine," he repeated, his voice dropping into a desperate, furious whisper. He shook me slightly. "You died in that pond, Lin Yao. The boy who cried for me died. And you, whoever you are, whatever spirit has taken over his eyes, you were born in my palace. You woke up in my water. You belong to me." I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. He knew. He didn't know the words transmigration, but he felt it. He knew I was a different soul, and he didn't care. He loved the monster I was, not the victim I had replaced. "Shen Zhao," I whispered, lifting my hands to grip his wrists, trying to pry his hands off my shoulders. "Let me go. This is madness. You cannot keep me here by force." "I am not keeping you by force." He stepped so close our bodies were pressed together. He let go of my shoulders and slid his hands down my back, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against him. He buried his face in the crook of my neck. I felt him inhale deeply, breathing in the scent of my skin. Tell me you want to leave. Look me in the eye and tell me you feel nothing for me, and I will open the gates myself. He was playing dirty. He was weaponizing the very tension we had been building for months. I tried to form the words. I tried to say I want to go home. But the words turned to ash in my throat, because as his arms wrapped around me, as his breath ghosted over my neck, I realized the terrifying truth. I didn't want to leave. I didn't love him the way the original Lin Yao did. I didn't love him with a pathetic, crawling submission. I loved him with a dark, twisted, matching fire. I loved the verbal sparring. I loved the way he looked at me like I was the only equal he had ever found. I loved the dangerous, intoxicating power of standing next to a king and knowing I was the only one who didn't have to bow. I slowly lifted my arms. My hands hovered in the air for a second, fighting the last shred of my modern sanity. Then, I surrendered. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, sinking my fingers into the heavy silk at his back. I pressed my cheek against his shoulder, letting out a long, shaky breath. Shen Zhao let out a sound, a deep, ragged groan of absolute relief. His arms tightened around me, crushing me against his chest, as if he was trying to fuse our bodies together. He pressed his lips against the side of my neck, burning a trail of fire across my skin. I will send an envoy to the border tomorrow, he whispered fiercely against my skin. I will give your brother 10 cities, 100 chests of gold, and 1,000 horses. But he will never have you. You are the Empress of Great Yan. I laughed, a breathless, broken sound, pulling my head back slightly to look at his dark, obsessive eyes. A male empress? I murmured, a challenging smirk playing on my lips. The historians will have a stroke. Shen Zhao smiled. It was a beautiful, terrifying, arrogant smile. Let them, he said softly, lifting his hand to cup the back of my neck. I am the emperor. I write the history. And then, he pulled me down, and finally, after months of silence, after freezing ponds and cold palaces and unsaid words, he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was heat and teeth and the taste of dark wine and desperation. I kissed him back with just as much force, my hands gripping his hair, letting the fire completely consume whatever was left of the cold, logical man I used to be. If you want the next part, the deeply uncensored continuation, the full heated nights in the Imperial bedchamber, and more unlimited 18+ ancient royal BL stories just like this, come join SpicyAncientBL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. The Empire's history is only just beginning,